Well, welcome everyone again to our first virtual learning session. Let me let in. We have a few more people joining here. Before we get started, if you're in a place where you're able to turn on your camera during these virtual learning sessions, just so we could see everyone's faces, that would be great. If you're not able to, don't feel like you have to, but it would be great if you're able to. And then we always start off all of our virtual learning sessions with everyone just giving their introduction in the chat. So if you're able to, if you could put your name and then the district you're working at in the chat, just so everyone can see where everyone's coming from, that would be great. Otherwise, we're just going to go ahead and get started. So like I said, this is our first virtual learning session. And we'll be starting off with a topic to kind of get us situated into the apprenticeship program. We have a great speaker lined up for you today. Jennifer Gaddis will be talking a little bit about how the school food system fits into the larger food system. So Jennifer, I could pass it over to you if you want to introduce yourself and feel free to just get started with your presentation.
Thanks, Erico. And remind me, how long do you want me to speak?
You are only speaker today, so 30 minutes or so is good, and then we'll take
Okay.
some time for questions. So thank
All
you.
right. Hi, everybody from snowy and bitterly cold Wisconsin, where I am. I'm in Madison, Wisconsin. I think many of you are in California, and I see some Colorado as well. So hi from another part of the country. As Erica mentioned, my name is Jen Gaddis, and I'm a professor in the School of Human Ecology at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And I've had the privilege of working with the Chef Yan Foundation for the last several years, getting to meet different cohorts of apprentices, and just wanted to say that I really appreciate all the work that you all are doing to make school food systems better in the places that you live, but also to provide inspiration for those of us in states where we don't have these same programs. So thank you for doing that local work, but also for being a national inspiration for us. So I'm going to talk a little bit today. I was asked to talk about some of the history of school food in the United States, and I'm happy to do that. But I also want to talk a little bit about some ongoing research that I've been doing on the school food workforce. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you all this, but really the work that I do and others do to try to document the need to invest in school food workers and to increase pay, respect, and career pathways that are available for people who are doing this important work. So I'm going to share my screen in just a second. Um, if I don't see a message in the chat, Erico or anyone else, feel free to like unmute and just flag me down or ask any questions. But I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen now. Okay, so first, I just wanted to say that one of the ways that I talk about school meals, I think, is a little bit different from how some people talk about them, is I talk about school food and school food workers as part of our public care infrastructure. So a lot of times when people are talking about school meals, they think about, oh, it's a food system, or maybe they'll say, oh, it's part of the education system because it is, part of our public and private schools that might be offering the national school lunch and breakfast programs. I think those things are true, but I also think that school food workers and the meals that you provide are situated not just in the food system and the education system, but also really as part of the public way in which we care for children, for families, for communities, and even for the land. And by that, I really mean some of you are probably in schools and school districts that are doing more with sourcing local food or trying to support organic or regenerative agriculture. All of those are ways that we can use public programs like school meals to care better for one another as humans and also for the ecosystems that we live in. So, one of the reasons why I, as a researcher, have become really focused on school meals instead of any other kind of food system is that if you look around the world, school meals are this incredibly sort of under how to put it, like people underestimate how important school food is. But when we think about school food around the world, about 70% of publicly funded food programs around the world are actually school food programs. So, not just in the United States, but in countries all over the world, this is a really important system that we have to think through to think about, well, is it serving children in the way that we think it should? Is it serving the people who are involved in growing and processing and cooking and serving the food in the way that we think that it should? So, just to kind of give you a sense of how widespread school meals are and how you all might be doing work in your specific districts or your specific, even school buildings, but you're part of this much bigger, broader network of people all over the world who are doing this really important work of feeding children. This map is a little bit outdated. There's been a lot of work really since the pandemic to expand access to school meals. So, this map from the World Food Program is from 2022, and I'm happy to report that now the total number of children that are actually getting meals around the country through a government-funded school meal program is over 450 million children per day. So this is a really important thing for us to think through, not only what it looks like in the United States, but also what we can learn from other countries and what other countries can learn from us, because I think it's part of this really important kind of shared mission of thinking about how we feed young people better, how we create new cultures of food, and how we ultimately support our agricultural communities and farmers and other food producers better through good school food policy. So this is an example that I just want to show, and I promise I will bring it to the United States and the history that I was told to talk about. But I just wanted to show this picture from Brazil. So Brazil, I think, is a really interesting example of a country for us to look at in the United States and to think about, ooh, what would it look like if we were to do similar kinds of things? So in Brazil, they have a school meal program, a national program that was started in the 1950s. But in 2008, 2009, sort of in sort of the wake of the global financial crisis, they actually really changed their school meal program and they made it a universal free program at the national level. They codified children's right to food in their constitution. So it's a constitutionally sort of defended right that students have access to free school meals in all public schools in Brazil. And they also implemented really important policies that require schools to source at least 30% of their ingredients from small scale family farmers who use environment friendly practices like agroecological or organic production methods. And this is a policy that has been so successful that the Brazilian government actually just increased this requirement to 45%. So I think that that's something that really provides a lot of inspiration in thinking about how when we have really forward-thinking policy, we can actually not only change what agricultural systems look like or the diversity of food that people are eating, we can really change kind of the whole system, and school food is a really important lever for doing that. So, you all here in the United States, I think being in some of the states where you're working, as I mentioned earlier, I think are doing this really important work in our country of providing examples for those of us in other states and even at the national level to look at and to learn from. So, thank you for being part of that kind of leading edge of change here in our country. So, speaking of
And
other
then,
sort of
sorry,
leaders of
Jennifer,
change, yeah,
can I stop you
mhm,
for just a second? I think
sure.
there's a few people who are confused on how to switch to Spanish audio.
Oh, sure.
So I'm gonna just, Marta, if you don't mind, just giving the instructions again out loud, just for those who are having trouble.
Oh, sorry, I'm seeing all of it. I'm
Yeah, no,
trying to
you're
make
all
sure.
good. I was trying to keep up to make sure I was understanding it
Yeah.
correctly. Thank you,
What it
Marta.
seems is like what people are reporting is that it might take a little bit to do the switch and that maybe the audio is coming and going a little bit. But people keep saying that it works. So vuelvo a los aprendices de habla hispana. Creo que algunos de ustedes están teniendo problemas porque el audio parece ser que viene y va, pero también me dicen que funciona. Seguramente se trata de algún problema de conectividad, pero les recuerdo, perfecto, me están diciendo que ya funciona. En cualquier caso, si alguien se unió a la reunión un poquito más tarde, por favor, marquen la bolita Interpretation en la zona inferior de sus pantallas y cliquen en el idioma español. Y si tienen cualquier otra duda, por favor, escríbanlo en el chat y les iré respondiendo. We're good to go.
Okay, thank you, Marta. And sorry about that, Jennifer. I'll
No
pass it
problem.
back to
And
you.
let me know if I need to speak any slower too for the interpretation as well. I tend to get excited and then want to talk really
No, you're
fast.
all good. Thank you. Appreciate us just
Um,
taking the time
yeah.
to do that.
No problem. Okay, so I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the history of school lunch in the United States. So, a lot of times when people talk about school food in the US, they'll say, oh, this is a national program that started in 1946 after the end of World War II as a way to make sure that we have healthy populations and also to make sure that we're dealing with our agricultural surpluses in a way that won't mess up our markets. And sort of that's true. Technically speaking, the National School Lunch Act was passed in 1946, but I like to tell a very different version of that history because I think if we start there, it erases about 50 years of really important experimentation and activism, much of which was led by women in their communities. So I'm going to start really in the 1890s, so what's called the Progressive Era within American history. And these pictures here are of a few of the women who were actually home economists who were really influential in creating some of the first nonprofit school meal programs in the country. So, this is a picture actually of one of the first central kitchens that was created. This was created in 1894. This was the New England kitchen. So, this was actually in Boston. And these women here were actually repurposing industrial scale laundry baskets that you can see here and packing sandwiches and milk and other sorts of things, and then sending those to different schools all around Boston. So this is kind of an early example of how, even though they didn't necessarily have kitchen infrastructure in a lot of the public schools at that time, they were really trying to figure out how do we provide an affordable, nutritious, sanitary meal to a lot of young people that otherwise might not have access to that food. This is another picture that shows in New York City some of their first school lunches. This picture is from the early 1900s. Again, a home economist was really involved in creating this particular program. And in 1909, she founded something called the School Lunch Committee, which was not only other home economists, but also educators, physicians, philanthropists, and a number of parents and other concerned community members. And what they did was they really worked together in a grassroots kind of community way to start providing school meals that they thought were affordable, nutritious, and notably culturally relevant for the different populations that they were serving in schools all around New York City. So by 1915, this kind of grassroots group of people had really grown, and they were serving lunches to over 800,000 students across New York City. So it was about a quarter of the elementary school population at the time. So this was without really having, a lot of additional funding, just sort of bootstrapping their own creation of this program. And one of the things that they did that I think was really notable is that they hired cooks from the community to make sure that whatever they were preparing would be tailored to the tastes and also religious requirements of the students that they were serving. And they also made sure that they were thinking about how, if students were receiving meals as a form of charity, this could make them feel stigmatized. So they really thought through what that might look like in terms of the payment structure and the student experience as well. Um, in the early years of school meals, so these pictures are actually from World War One. There was also a lot of effort to say, hey, our school meal programs are a community resource. We can actually grow vegetables in school gardens, or we can grow vegetables in our home gardens and donate them to the school meal program. But there was a fair amount of effort to really think about how we could actually not only be more self-sufficient as communities, but have these places within our schools that teach kids how to grow food and also allow them to have access to that nutritious food in their own school meals. So these are some other early examples of what some of this farm to school work looked like. This is in a school building. You can see kids as well as adults working together to do some community canning of peaches that they basically were preserving for future use in their school meals. And one of the things that I think is really interesting to look at in some of these historical pictures as well as like stories of kind of how people created these community-based programs is a lot of times they would actually be using equipment in the schools, and when they weren't using it for making school meals, it would be like a community resource or an asset that people could use if they wanted to do their own canning for home consumption or things like that. So like the lines between like what belonged to the school and what belonged to the community were really more blurred. And I think it's interesting to think about because a lot of times now in schools we have facilities. Certainly, some schools have really beautiful, great kitchen facilities. Others have practically no facilities for actually cooking versus reheating. But in places where they do have facilities, it's oftentimes not used in the afternoons, in the evenings, and the weekends, and a fair amount during the summertime as well. So I think that there's a lot of potential to be thinking a little bit more creatively about how schools can be used to meet broader food needs in our communities. And I think that we have some good historical examples. Of course, regulations were not as complex or restrictive then as they are now, but I still think it's useful to kind of open our minds a little bit to think about what school food can be in our communities. So the whole vision that a lot of these early reformers who thought, ooh, maybe food shouldn't just be this private thing or this commercialized thing where kids are going and buying like more or less junk food from street vendors. Like maybe we should have these programs that are part of the educational component of their school day. A lot of the things that they thought about as part of their vision are things that we hear people talk about now, over 100 years later. So their vision included free lunches for all, school gardens, cooking classes, canning and food preservation workshops, linking what's happening in the school cafeteria to academics through health, nutrition, and biology classes, engaging families and neighborhood in the school garden and kitchen and cafeteria spaces. A number of them also really thought through ways that young people could be involved in the labor of preparing meals, learning from and building relationships with well-trained and adequately compensated adults in this more connected community economy of care. And notably, another thing at this point in time was that a lot of these home economists in particular really cared about trying to create safe, good quality jobs for women who they felt otherwise might not have access to good employment options, who might be working in factory conditions that were relatively unsafe, or who might, because of their age or other kind of characteristics, be discriminated against in certain labor market conditions. So I want to just read one quote from MS Medley, who was one of the kind of she was like the Chef Anne of her day, is kind of how I would describe it. She was from Philadelphia Public Schools, and she wrote this book on the school lunch, its organization and management. And not only was really influential in terms of publishing this book and lots of people sort of reading it and figuring out how to create school meal programs in their own communities around the country, but she also became like a destination where people would send more or less apprentices to come and actually cook in her kitchens and learn how to do sort of all the kind of administrative things that they had figured out how to do in the Philadelphia public school system with their school meal program. So, one of the things that she says at the conclusion of her book is that school lunch should not be a mere appendage of the educational system. Sorry, I have to move my Zoom. It should be closely linked with the work of the school, one of its arteries through which the active blood of cooperation runs. The departments with which it may be correlated are domestic science, school gardens, vocational classes, and the medical department. So the reason why I think that's important to highlight is that I think one of the big kind of battles that people are still facing within the school food world is trying to get people to really understand that school meals are part of the educational system and that they're underutilized in terms of how we actually think about uh, what school meals are for, that it's not just about getting calories and nutrients into young people, but if we were to really reconceptualize school meals, it could be so much more in terms of how young people experience these different academic subjects, how they learn to care for themselves and others, and so on. Sorry, I got distracted because it says my screen sharing is paused. So let me try this. Let me try resetting it. There we go. So, moving on. Um, at the end of the Progressive Era, there was this really kind of important network of new nonprofit school meal programs around the country. And it wasn't until the Great Depression that the US federal government first got involved. What ended up happening was they had a lot of commodities. So this picture sort of shows some of these early commodities donations, and they needed to figure out a way to stabilize agricultural markets, and they needed a politically sort of suitable place where people felt like it was okay to donate excess food at a time when a lot of people were really going hungry. So schools were considered to be one of these sites, and the federal government ended up creating this commodities program, which still exists today, as I'm sure you all know from working in schools. But they also provided labor. So the Works Progress Administration hired women, in particular women who were single head of households or who otherwise really needed access to a paying job to cook and serve meals in their communities. So all of that really helped this sort of collection of nonprofit school meal programs all across the country grow. And at the end of World War II, people felt like, okay, this was really successful. We want to make sure that we're actually investing federal resources and creating a longstanding permanent program. So 1946, the date that you see on this slide, is in fact when we got our first sort of national school meals legislation, the program that we still have in existence today. That's when it was created. But as I hope I've been able to tell you in the last like 10, 15 minutes or so, it didn't just magically appear. It was a lot of hard work and experimentation and dreaming that went into creating um, basically the platform and the backbone for what would become the National School Lunch Program. That said, even after it was created in the 1940s, it didn't mean that it worked perfectly or that all students who should have had access to school meals had access to school meals. And in 1968, Jean Fairfax, you see here, she helped coordinate a series of community-based research projects all around the country where basically women's groups across a lot of different lines of race and religion and class came together and they went to their local schools and they did like data collection. They sort of documented how many kids are not getting access to free school meals who need free school meals. And what they were able to do was to gather data and publish a very highly influential report that like the media took up and became like this really sort of hot button issue that was discussed. So this report, Their Daily Bread, estimated that about 20 million children who needed free or reduced lunches were not getting them. So Jean Fairfax and the women that she worked with really helped to galvanize public support for expanding the National School Lunch Program. So, what I want to sort of make clear with that point is that school food is now and always has been a community effort to really make these systems work as they should. We can see that now in existence with the work that you all are doing, but also so many other bright spots around the country. So in my remaining time, I'm going to get contemporary on us. And I wanted to actually show you all something that I take inspiration from. This is from my neck of the woods. This is from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So these pictures are from some youth from Milwaukee Public Schools who were really trained in doing community organizing, and when they came back to in-person schooling after the pandemic, a lot of these young people who are involved in an organization called Youth Empowered in the Struggle, they did a survey of all the kind of high school students across Milwaukee, which is the largest school district in Wisconsin. And it turned out that the number one issue that people were concerned about was the quality of their school meals. And I remember seeing this in the news, so seeing some of the art that they had created and seeing um, their demands that they had created and feeling like, wow, that's like very cool of them because usually when I hear young people talk about school meals, one of their demands is not increase wages for food service workers. So I remember feeling like these young people had a really sophisticated understanding of why things looked the way that they did in their school, and it's been really cool to not only follow their campaign, but to offer support when I can. And they've done some really great work trying to support food service workers in Milwaukee and making sure that they're showing up as young people in solidarity with the workers that feed them to make sure that they are advocating for higher quality jobs and compensation and respect for the school food workers in their schools. I also think we see a lot of things happening at broader levels. So starting in communities, but then expanding to, these state level initiatives. I think many of you are from California or Colorado. And again, the work that you've all been doing to secure universal free school meals at the state level has been so important, not only for the national movement, but for states like Wisconsin, where I live, where we have a Healthy School Meals for All coalition, but we haven't been successful yet in passing statewide legislation. So I just want to kind of highlight that school food systems are really complex, and sometimes it can feel like change is slow or things are just really hard. They're made up of a lot of diverse organizations. And I think that sometimes it can feel like there's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of rules to follow, and just a lot of hard work going into making sometimes what feels like small changes. But I just want to emphasize that through the work that you're doing, you're all playing a really important role in this systems change work more broadly. And that brings me kind of to my last point that I think within all this kind of conversation about school food that is happening right now, I'm sure many of you have seen in the news or even in, um, you know, sort of political discussions, this increased conversation and desire to remove ultra processed food from schools. But I think sometimes what gets lost in that conversation is that we can't really have high quality food in schools. We certainly can't have scratch cooked food in schools if we don't center the needs of school nutrition workers. So, one of the things that I learned pretty early on in my research career working on school meals is that we really have to look to the people who are involved in serving meals. And we have to think about what it looks like to have culinary skill that's embodied by an on-site labor force. If you want to be doing things that are more culturally responsive in terms of the meals that you're serving to kids, or you want to be using different kinds of seasonal ingredients or be able to take different kinds of products from local farmers, you have to have that ability to actually cook. And I wanted to just sort of show this picture because this is actually a picture of some of the women that I met back in 2010 when I was doing some research for my first book. And they had told me about how in their particular school, they actually had a functional kitchen, but over time, in order to try to save money, the district had moved to a central kitchen model where they were just preparing food and shipping it to the schools, and all they were able to do was reheat. And they used to have a bakery where they would do a lot of fresh preparation. And so when I was kind of doing research, I would ask questions about what things had looked like in the past, and then they would bring in these historical photos showing that they used to be doing a lot more scratch cooking. And I think that it's important to sort of recognize that In some places, there's not really much memory of doing that anymore because people have retired or it was kind of never a part of what the school was doing in recent memory. And so the kind of work that you all are doing now, where you're really going to places that are doing scratch cooking, you're learning, and then you're bringing that back to new places. I just think it's so important that you're doing this work of building community-based capacity to do more culinary based school meals. So I wanted to just end by talking a little bit more about labor and some of the work that I've done with Healthy School Meals for All Coalition in Wisconsin, as well as the Chef Ann Foundation. So when Wisconsin schools primarily were going back to in-person learning after the pandemic, a number of the food service directors in Wisconsin were really concerned about staff shortages that they were experiencing, and also were feeling pretty frustrated that they felt like their staff had worked really hard during the pandemic as essential employees and weren't really seeing any kind of increased compensation or recognition of their work. So they asked for me and some of our collaborators to work with them to do a statewide study that would document what does the actual workforce look like in the state of Wisconsin? How are people being compensated? What are the challenges that we're facing? So we worked together to create this report. I won't go into depth about this now, but I do have in the slide deck that I'm sharing with you all a QR code in case you're interested in looking at the full report. This is information that we actually didn't really have any funding to do this. We just did it as a statewide coalition, but I know that a number of food service directors were able to use the information that we gathered to successfully advocate for wage increases for their staff. So if anyone is interested in learning more about this and how they might do it within kind of their own state context, I'm very happy to talk about that more and to share resources, either in the Q&A or if you email me after the talk. One of the things that came out of this report, though, was this infographic where we were thinking about, as a statewide coalition, how do we actually communicate to people what we think the problem is and sort of the value add of focusing on workers. So, in a lot of states, there's this emphasis on trying to get free school meals for all students and to have some sort of incentive for purchasing local food and doing farm to school work. Both of those things are great, but we also felt like, as a statewide coalition, that if we didn't also focus on workforce development and improving compensation, we wouldn't really be able to build the strong school meal programs that we think are needed. So we felt like if our goal is really to have nourished children, strong schools, caring communities, and thriving local farms, that we have to have this component of our policy, of our activism that really is focused on workers. So our theory of change that we kind of document in this little graphic is that if we really want school meals to be better, and we also, are being realistic about the finances, workers have to be part of this equation because we feel like we can increase student participation, which will bring more revenue into school meal programs, and then improve the ability to provide high quality jobs for workers who can then stay in those jobs and build their culinary skills and their ability to use local and regionally grown foods if we're serving fresh, nourishing, scratch-made meals to students. But we have to make that investment in workers for this model to really pay off. So luckily, there are some states that are kind of showing us at least options for how this could look in terms of healthy school meals for all legislation. Those of you who are in California, some of your early budget stuff, I apologize, that should say 2023, showed basically these investments in school kitchen and equipment upgrades to support scratch cooking, as well as increased funding for the reimbursement rates, which can then be used to supplement wages and compensation, things of that nature. And in Colorado, they specifically included some things related to supporting wages and compensation for school food workers. And those things were actually put on pause because of some state budgetary issues. But actually, this past November, Colorado voters overwhelmingly approved, even at higher margins than the original Healthy School Meals for All legislation, allocating more funding to make sure that the program is whole as originally designed, and that it includes these pieces related to increasing wages for school food workers. So I wanted to call out Colorado and California specifically as two states that have taken kind of this more holistic approach to thinking about school meal programs. And in case you all haven't seen this, this is pretty small, but this is a screenshot of the 2025 KIT grant and retention and recruitment grant that the California Department of Education recently released. And I just wanted to highlight that it actually has specifically designated $10 million for recruitment and retention of school nutrition professionals. And I think that that is a really positive step in the right direction, and wanted to sort of highlight that this is something that really, I think, responds to research about the conditions that school food workers were facing in the state of California, and also information that districts have provided about what turnover and recruitment and retention challenges look like currently. So it's not just California, Colorado, like places that are serving more meals than ever that are experiencing moderate or significant staffing shortages. The School Nutrition Association and their trends report finds that nationally speaking, 9 in 10 schools are experiencing moderate or significant staffing shortages. So what that tells us is that this is a really systemic problem, and that we have to pay attention to improving job quality so that people can afford to stay in these jobs and that schools can staff their programs appropriately. That said, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is the agency that oversees the school meal programs, they collect a ton of information from schools about school meal participation and various things that are required as part of federal reporting, but they've never actually collected systematic data on how school food workers are compensated, what the structure of their jobs looks like, or anything that would really give us like a strong national picture of why we're seeing some of the challenges that we're seeing. So, one of the things that was very exciting for me as a researcher who's worked in this space for a while was that the U.S. Department of Agriculture actually decided that they wanted to fund research on this topic, and they have at this point funded a project that I am leading in collaboration with Chef Ann Foundation and the Food Insight Group, which is a $1.5 million project to lead a study of the school food workforce in the United States. And USDA, they actually outlined the kind of major goals for this research study. And I want to just spend maybe 30 seconds on this, and then I promise I'm kind of wrapping up. So, part of what they wanted us to do was to understand the current state of the school food workforce and the structure of their jobs. That's great, pretty basic. They also wanted us to increase our understanding of how recruitment, retention, and job satisfaction are impacted by different school characteristics or employment structure. Like, for instance, if you're outsourced to a management company or self-operated. But the third piece that I thought was really interesting was that they asked us to try to identify promising strategies for creating a stable and respected workforce capable of providing fresh, healthy meals to students while supporting resilient local and regional food systems. So that language about a stable and respected workforce and this goal of not just providing, you know, calories and the right sort of like, nutrient contents to students, but actually supporting resilient local and regional food systems, to me is such an interesting ask because I don't think there's any way that you could do this without doing the kind of scratch cooking that you all are learning how to do. So, um, I want to end in just a second so there's time for questions and other stuff that you might want to do. But in case anyone is interested in learning more about kind of where this project is at now, we're about halfway through the 3-year project. I did provide a link in the slide deck where it says slide link here, where if you're interested in seeing some of the early results of this project, you're welcome to click on that. For now, I'm just going to say thank you for being part of this program with Chef Ann, and I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about things I just briefly touched on, or if there's things that you have questions about, I'm happy to yeah, open it up to you all for conversation.
Thank you, Jennifer. Great
Mhm.
presentation. And we'll also be sure to share her slides in the follow-up as well. We do have time for questions. Looks like Gabriella, you have a question in the chat, or if you'd like to, you could also unmute and ask it out loud.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I heard the presentation was wonderful, by the way. Thank you so
Oh,
much for
thank
all
you.
this. I think one of the reasons I noticed it at the school district now working with all these employees, and I'm not part of the school district yet. I'm just working with an kitchen and chef program. They've been a lot of comments from the employees that the salary is really low. So that's why it's one of the reasons that's why they don't stay with that job because they need to get two jobs or three jobs sometimes in order to pay the rent, and they would like to stay and have more hours, but they are not offering more hours, just like a 3 hours for the subs, sometimes 6 hours, but it's like a here in California it's like a 17 or 18, not even $18 an hour. It's really low, and that's why people I kind of they're not complaining, but it's like a comments that they're making because they say I would like to have more hours, but they are not offering more hours, and so they have other jobs, and that's part of my situation. I have another job as well. I found this program. I'm really excited. I'm learning, and I would like to get a job at the school district. But with this kind of salary, it's really difficult to stay working only for the school district. We would like more hours and a little bit more money. That's my comment.
Yeah, Gabriella, I think that what you're saying is something that I hear a lot from people. And um, one of the things that the Wisconsin coalition that I worked with, they really wanted to point out in that report that I mentioned was that it's not just that school food professionals are actually earning generally less than other education support professionals in their schools, but their jobs are more likely to be part-time and also seasonal. So if you actually look at how much people are earning in other education support professional positions or even in institutional food service and like hospital or assisted living facilities or things like that, you all are actually earning a lot less money by choosing to work in um, K-12 schools. And so I think it's really important to change the narrative and to really highlight just how challenging and demanding and important the work is that you all do. So I don't know if I know this is kind of early on in your time together, but I don't know if any of you have seen some of the Powered by School Food Professionals campaign that Chef Ann Foundation did in California. But I think that that's a really cool example of trying to change public perception about who's doing the work, why they matter, and how it should be compensated. And I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do with this research project now is to engage more people, even in the labor movement, like from National Education Association, and sort of asking these questions. Like, I mean, we know that the school nutrition workforce is over 90% female. Like, that's one reason, certainly, why wages and compensation tend to be lower and jobs tend to be more part-time. But that doesn't mean it's fair, right? Or that it should stay that way. So I think making sure that we're, um, on the one hand, gathering more information from people about what their experiences are, but also what their desires are for their jobs and for their communities and for the children that they're feeding is how we really start to change what things look like over time. And it can be very slow, very frustrating, but I feel like even in the time that I've worked in school food, which has been um, a little over 15 years now, I feel like the needs and the value of school nutrition professionals is much more part of the conversation than it was when I first started. So I think we just have to kind of keep showing up and telling people why the work matters and why it's important to make sure that people have the ability to stay in their jobs because it's not just about learning, particular culinary skills. You're also learning people, right? Like you're these people who are going to be part of young people's life for maybe longer than like a classroom teacher. And I hear sometimes people who can afford to stay in their jobs long enough, know not only one kid, but that kid's family relations. And I think that that part of like really being, an important just adult in your community, let alone like the school itself, is really important, but is never talked about as part of the job, and certainly not compensated. So I think it's important to not only be sort of talking about some of these professional skills related to food safety and kind of culinary preparation, but also to really be demanding more respect for the care work that people are doing in schools to make sure that young people are really having a caring adult presence, which so many of you provide for them.
Thank you, Jennifer. And good question. And lots of good comments in the chat as well about different people's experiences. So thank you everyone for sharing.
I also wanted to share, Jennifer, that you're getting a lot of positive feedback also in
Oh, good.
Spanish.
Oh,
People
thank you.
love, yeah, your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Marta. Any final questions? We probably have time for maybe one more question, just so we could save some time for program questions at the end. No final questions? Okay, well, Jennifer, we can let you go now. Thank you again so much for presenting to us today. And have a great evening and stay warm. I know it's cold out there where you are. So, and then apprentices, if you all could just stay on the call, we're going to wrap up with some housekeeping and then we'll save some time for any program questions. Thank you, Jennifer. Have a good evening. Okay, so apprentices, we're going to go through a few housekeeping items, and I know some of you might have some program questions as we just got started a few days ago in the program. So I want to make sure we have time for that. So starting off with just some housekeeping. I believe you should have received an email regarding a pre-survey for the apprenticeship program today. I mean, if you haven't received it yet, you will be receiving it here in the next few days. So just a reminder that if you do receive any sort of evaluation surveys from our team, we ask that you fill it out just so we could gather some feedback on your experiences with the program, and it helps us improve the program for future cohorts of apprentices. So again, you should have received a pre-survey, so it shouldn't take too long to fill out. So when you have a chance, please fill that out. A couple other of quick reminders. Just a reminder that each virtual learning session has a reflection assignment that's due for every call, and there's a required reflection assignment for all virtual learning sessions. So we will always be sharing a follow-up email after the virtual learning session with the slide deck to any of the presentations that we may have gone through, as well as links to the recording. So we'll share that in the next few days. But otherwise, again, on Moodle, for each virtual learning session, you'll see a reflection assignment that you need to complete. So be sure and complete that. And then finally, I know I mentioned this on the orientation last week, but our next virtual learning session will actually be next week on January 28th. After that, we'll go to the bi-weekly schedule, but just because of scheduling constraints, the next one will be a week from now versus the usual 2-week schedule. So I wanted to remind everyone of that on Wednesday. Other than that, that is all the reminders I have. Is there any program questions? If you don't have questions at this time, feel free to hop off the call. We'll see you next week. But if you do have any questions, Marta and I could stay on for a few minutes to answer any questions people have.